I only worked on the computations. I didn't really know what they were for.
Oh, no kidding?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you working on now, Dave?
Electronics.
What kind?
Well, it's called automation. We're developing a machine that'll do the work of about 500 men.
You figure you can get a machine that'll do most everything, huh?
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today I'm joined by Peter Yapp, who is a partner at Shillings and was a former Deputy Director of UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Scott.
So you have been in the field of computer forensics for going on almost 3 decades or so, including your key role as a Deputy Director of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. I wonder if, again, it's hard to do in a few minutes, but if you could just point maybe a handful of key things that you've witnessed or some insights that you gained through your career span.
Yes, so it goes back quite a way to pretty much the start of computer forensics. I actually started off as an investigator for Revenue and Customs in the UK, ended up running their high-tech crime team, looking at everything that came in that was customs related, so tax fraud and import-export and customs duty and all sorts of other things. But that investigation groundwork and way of thinking, I think, has followed me through and has been really valuable. And I think it was very valuable going into the National Cybersecurity Centre, where I, certainly for the first year or so, ran the incident response team for all the major incidents that came across the board into the UK. And during that time, I think what I learned was that it's quite naive to think that attackers always work in a way that is targeted. So in fact, most of the attackers that we saw, many of them anyway, were just looking for weaknesses in security. So they'd find a weakness and they'd then work out whether they could monetize it. So instead of a real looking at the threats and looking whether you are at risk, it kind of turned things on its head for me. And I thought, actually, what they're looking for is vulnerabilities. And that's what you have to protect yourself against. And also collateral damage was a really big thing. So again, if you think that you're not going to be hit because the particular attackers are not a threat to your company or your organization, the UK's National Health Service was definitely not a target for the WannaCry attack back in May 2017. I think it was very clear they weren't a target, but the damage done was huge, really widespread. So that scanning for vulnerabilities, pen testing, just making sure that your own house is in order is really important. And the other thing that I think I came across really strongly from my time at the National Cybersecurity Centre was that you need to take some simple steps. It doesn't have to be that complex. And actually, lots of these attacks could be stopped if you just did some pretty straightforward things. For example, passwords. If you had a stronger password, you use 3 random words, not based on information that could be linked to you or that you could find out in a simple search, but just 3 random words makes quite a complex password, and probably quite memorable as well. And that for business critical accounts, that you should have multi-factor authentication as that additional layer. So anything that's important. And just keeping software and devices up to date sounds so simple, but patching software, there's almost always in a software update a security element. Undervalued thing to do, but really very effective, will keep a lot of attacks out. And that will help you plug those vulnerabilities that hackers could exploit. So fairly simple lessons, but I think we should be all doing more of that.
Well, again, I think trying to summarize your 3 decades of experience in just a few minutes is very difficult. I do want to kind of go back and just appreciate the fact that you have really seen the evolution and the maturity of not just the cybersecurity space, but really the computing and the forensics and the investigation, and how interesting that the way that bad actors, or whether they're state or individuals, the way they think about monetizing has changed, and the mediums and the tools that they use have changed. But the learnings or the training that you received early on really helps to think through, the thought process. But it is very intriguing for you to say that, oftentimes these attacks are not necessarily targeted, not per se looking to target a particular entity as much as they're scanning for vulnerabilities. And thank you for those best practices. And again, I think most companies, surprisingly, I think they should know, especially if they have reasonable resources on the IT and then the CISO side and DevSec ops side, to really address this. But it's amazing how there's still vulnerabilities and shortfalls. What do you attribute that to, given the fact that we're in 2020?
So I think part of this is that it's not really been adopted as a business risk. It kind of sits a little bit out on its own. And I think boards and senior management teams are kind of saying, well, this is the CISO's problem, or this is the IT team's problem. And it's perhaps not getting the kind of attention and the investment and the time that it should. So I think there's that, and I think people think it's just too difficult. So some of those principles that I laid out are pretty straightforward, but keeping everything patched and up to date, actually, it can be, in a large organization, quite an onerous task. And I think perhaps people put it lower down the priority level, or they're too worried about the effect that it's going to have on their business, and they're kind of risk averse to putting in the patches in case it might stop something working. And I think that might have been true in the earlier days, but I think it's pretty rare now. And I think companies that are waiting 9 months or more until they patch things, they're just leaving themselves wide open. And on ransomware attacks, a huge percentage of successful attacks are using vulnerabilities that were made public back in 2017. So something's not going right.
It's such an interesting trivia fact. And it's amazing that some organizations, from a bureaucracy priority process, makes it so difficult for them to have upward path, whether it's migration patches, whatever that's necessary for them to be up to date, because of concerns of other customized pieces that they've created that could potentially break. Let's talk a little bit about Shillings, the role that you play there. Yes.
So I'm the partner at Schillings for cybersecurity and information security. Schillings is an international law firm, and we help businesses, families, individuals around the world. And I think uniquely, we comprise intelligence experts, investigators, cyber specialists, risk consultants, lawyers, and top people from military, banking, and government. So it's a real mix there. And the firm acts as one, and we aim to provide a kind of trusted specialist and highly responsive set of advice. So our core offerings: litigation, understanding the risks to reputation and privacy, and acting in a crisis, whilst all the time keeping our clients safe. So within all of that, my work is broadly broken down into 3 areas: protect, investigate, and respond. And on the protect strand, we carry out system testing, including penetration testing, system reviews or assessments looking at policies and standards, some bespoke training, particularly to boards, and CISO as a service. So that's short-term or ongoing regular advice provided to individuals or family offices, organizations or businesses on specific cyber and information security issues where they need extra resource, or perhaps they can't afford to have full-time resource in-house. On the investigate strand, we carry out the examination of digital devices, and that's to identify and preserve, recover, protect and analyze that evidence of maybe fraud, insider trading, misconduct, copyright theft, loss of proprietary information, reputational damage, impact on privacy, a whole range of things, all the while preserving that evidence so that it's legally admissible wherever it ends up. So my team helps out on litigations and open source intelligence gathering. And finally, we respond. So our cyber crisis response service covers incidents of extortion, including sextortion, ransomware, dealing with a cyber attack, and responding to a data theft.
It's a very interesting holistic set of services that you wouldn't think that a law firm would typically handle, but from a holistic needs basis, it makes a lot of sense. Let's get into the current landscape. We're in 2020 in the U.S. at least. We're going through major elections, and there's a lot of intervention, let's say, or outside influence. And of course, North Korea is very actively always looking for those vulnerabilities, and particularly ransomware, as part of their core GDP. Thoughts about the current landscape, some of the big risk threats that you see, and then let's transition to talk about how that's going to change or maybe even amplify in 2021.
Yeah, so I think ransomware gets the column inches all the time, but actually business email compromise, BEC, or sometimes called CEO fraud or bank transfer fraud, and in the UK, authorized push payment fraud, those are all on the increase. So I think particularly where we are at the moment, a lot more remote working, and that's given the fraudsters more time to carry out these type of frauds, and the number of routes available to attack, I think, has increased. And more money is lost through that type of fraud than any other, certainly more than ransomware. And I think for that, people just need to stop and think, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. A lot of those frauds you could probably stop if people just phoned up and said, have you really changed your bank account details? Do you really want me to transfer that money to somewhere that I've never transferred it to before? And I think in this electronic age, we rely so much on email. People just don't ask the question. They don't pick up the phone. And I haven't found a way technically of stopping this. There's no kind of computer security way of stopping it. It's people and checking and stopping and thinking, no, is this really the right thing to do? So people are getting in, hackers are getting into email trails. They're using phishing. Phishing has been around for ages. It's getting more sophisticated, and there'll undoubtedly be more specifically targeted attacks. So I think that's where we're going to see an increase. I think we're going to see an increase in ransomware, unfortunately. I think ransomware is becoming a big business. It probably impacts the US more than it does Europe and the UK currently. So I think we're going to see perhaps a bit of a geographic shift going forward. And I think looking ahead, there are going to be more attacks on the Internet of Things. So those IoT devices, they're going to be used to disrupt and overload networks, lock down essential equipment, probably all for financial gain. It's that monetizing aspect. So that's where rather grim look into the future, where I think we'll be going.
Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned is that because the world has shifted to more remote working and distributed decentralized work, we're really kind of much more exposed to the volume, but also the firewall situation of where we're actually originating and sending emails, receiving emails, and then also vulnerable to phishing because depending on where we're working, let's say a cafe or a bookstore, that has open Wi-Fi, for instance. There's just a lot of vulnerability, and I think it comes down to, like I said, taking that one extra step as a precaution. Oftentimes, we see something, whether it's a text message, a phone call, or an email, and we just assume that it's legitimate. It's from our bank or it's from some broker dealer, let's say, and we just say, okay, well, it looks like I need to refresh or send something. What advice would you give to consumers that are listening to remind them to just do that one more check?
Yeah, I think it's just stop and think, is this too good to be true? I think you if you're in an office, you just lean across the desk and say, what should I do about this? You can kind of bounce the ideas off, and I think we've lost a bit of that with so much more home working and lockdown and whatever. So I think maybe it just requires you to take time out. If someone's asking you to do something urgently, then that's a red flag. So check with someone else. Just bounce it off someone else, and it may be a call, it may be a message, it may be an email, but just take that time, because that's how these criminals are working their frauds. They're saying to people, you've got to react quickly, and they're doing that because your guard's down and you don't get a chance to think about it.
And you also mentioned the Internet of Things and just this notion that as more devices come onto the network, and some could be, in public spaces, some could be within our home, and certainly autonomous and moving things like our cars, for example. So that means there's a lot more entry points, and of course, there's things that's being packets being sent over the air as well. What are some things that we need to consider as IoT becomes much more pervasive around us?
So I think there's something that governments should do, regulators should do, and we're starting to see this in pockets around the world. I think that security needs to be built into these devices from the get-go, from the start. So if that's not happening, if it's not done on a governmental level, then it's based on market forces, and the question is, will the average consumer buy something for $10 more because it's more secure, or will they want to save the $10? And if we want to be safe and secure in our homes and surrounded by these many Internet of Things devices, then as you said, in cars, they're becoming more and more computerized. Then I think we've got to start saying, what would we do about safety? And do you want to be safe from the internet? So safety, you might have all sorts of devices in your car. We started with seat belts, and now we have lane control and anti-collision mechanisms in cars. But we need all of that built in to our Internet of Things, and I don't think we're thinking about that. We're just thinking about the usability and the cost. And I think as consumers, we can help change the market by saying, actually, I do want a password on my fridge, and I do want to be able to change that password. I don't want it to come with a default, and I don't want it to be wide open on the Wi-Fi. And I think as consumers, we need to be educated and start demanding these things of our suppliers. And I think that will have an even greater effect than perhaps the regulators and government.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point. And, I think in some ways, EU has done a really nice job, especially on the privacy side, of not only creating the regulatory framework and updating it, but also the consumers that are really rallying and supporting. I wonder for North America, we have the same level of awareness and desire to do so, but certainly do recognize the need to have regulatory aspects that mandates essentially a standard to the manufacturers, because to your point, the manufacturers are incented to profit maximize. They're not incented to build the most secure and least vulnerable types of device that gets connected to our various networks. Let's talk a little bit about how cyber criminals are becoming more sophisticated in their approach.
Yes. So the march of the criminal gangs, I think. So I think what we're seeing is that cyber criminals are evolving. We're seeing tailored ransomware, custom coding for some attacks, sharing of infrastructure to maximize the opportunities. So the cyber criminals, they're becoming more sophisticated. They're using tools and resources that they find on the devices that they infiltrate and take over. They're using management tools found on Microsoft Windows, such as PowerShell. They're using that in a really clever way, but they've also set themselves up so that they run like a business. So they have different people with different skills carrying out the actions required. So there'll be experts at infiltration, people who are really good at phishing, trying to get into the network. Then they'll bring in a second stage of experts who are really good at traversing across and within the network to find that valuable data or apply the ransomware encryption. And then there's a third group who are really good at negotiating the ransom in a kind of call center way. And I think that kind of sophisticated business model is going to mean more and more attacks, because they're making a lot of money like this, and they can afford to spread out their network. They can afford to buy in the resource, buy in the expertise to do all of these particular parts. And ransomware has become big business. It's they're making a lot of money out of it, and some of the arguments that I hear around ransomware about the attackers not returning the data or not returning the encryption key, they're about making money, and they kind of got reputation to keep going, and they even allow feedback on some of their sites. So you can say, yeah, it was really good negotiating with them. So it's a whole new world out there, and I think we need to be aware and alert to this. And maybe the counter to this is just getting the fundamentals right, like I said earlier. Some of those mitigations, good passwords, patching, scanning for vulnerabilities, and correcting them, and stop these people getting in. I mean, there's some other basics as well. One of the things that frustrates me is when I hear that people don't have a separate backup, that they backed up into the cloud in real time, and all their backups and their real data was encrypted at the same time. Some of those things, if you go back a few years, we all used to take tape backups and take them out of the machine and put them in a safe. That just doesn't happen anymore, but that would stop certainly a lot of the ransomware, not all of it. Some of the newer ways of dealing with ransomware are threatening to expose that data to the world, to the regulators. So the Information Commissioner in the UK, if you don't pay over that ransom. So there are layers of problems there, and what I've outlined wouldn't mitigate against all of those, but it would certainly reduce the impact.
Fascinating. I wish we had another half an hour to discuss. I have more questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. So with that, I've been joined by Peter Yapp, who is a partner at Shillings and former Deputy Director of UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. Peter, thanks for joining today.
Thank you very much, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.